For years, I believed my sister hated her daughter simply because she was a girl. I thought it was a cruel, twisted preference. But the truth was a venomous secret, a betrayal so profound it connected her child directly to my own deepest heartbreak. When I finally uncovered it, I didn't just seek justice. I orchestrated the complete and utter demolition of our entire family. My sister, Janet, had always broadcasted her disdain for her own gender with a strange, unnerving pride. It was a core tenet of her personality, a foundational belief she had held since we were children playing in our grandmother's overgrown garden. While I was content with dolls and fairy tales, Janet was climbing trees and demanding to play war with the neighborhood boys, her voice already laced with a contempt for anything she deemed girly or weak. This wasn't a phase she outgrew, it metastasized with age. In high school, her friends were exclusively male. In college, she joined a fraternity as their sweetheart and treated the campus sororities with open scorn. Her professional life was no different. She thrived in male-dominated industries, boasting about being one of the guys, a woman who understood logic and reason instead of succumbing to emotion and drama. So, when she announced her first pregnancy, none of us were surprised by her fervent, almost manic insistence that she was having a boy. She didn't just hope for a son. She spoke of it as an inevitability, a cosmic certainty she had willed into existence. The gender reveal party was a monument to this conviction. Her backyard was a sea of blue balloons, blue streamers, a towering cake with blue frosting. She wore a blue dress, her husband, Mark, in a matching blue polo. It felt less like a celebration and more like a coronation for a prince who had yet to arrive. I stood off to the side, my husband Ryan's hand resting on the small of my back, a familiar, comforting pressure that did little to soothe the ache in my own empty womb. 7 years. 7 years of trying, of invasive procedures, of hormone injections that left me bruised and weeping, of monthly cycles that brought with them a fresh, gut-wrenching wave of failure. Seeing Janet, so effortlessly pregnant and so dismissively certain of what she wanted, was like pressing a thumb into a fresh wound. I watched her face, radiant with anticipation, as Mark fired the smoke cannon. A thick, billowing cloud erupted, and for a split second, the world held its breath. Then, the color registered. It wasn't the royal blue she had ordained. It was a soft, undeniable, Pepto-Bismol pink. The shift in her demeanor was instantaneous and seismic. The brilliant smile collapsed, her eyes widening in a brief, unguarded flash of horror before a mask of placid disappointment settled over her features. Her shoulders slumped, a subtle but complete deflation of her entire being. She forced a hollow laugh and hugged Mark, but I saw it. The entire family saw it. Her dream had been publicly shattered. The rest of her pregnancy was a masterclass in passive aggression. Her social media became a shrine to the boy mom aesthetic, filled with shared articles about the supposed horrors of raising girls in a world of toxic femininity, and posts in private Facebook groups where she lamented her fate and openly prayed for a son the next time around. She was mourning a child she never had, while the one growing inside her was treated like a consolation prize. After Kaylee was born, Janet's bizarre behavior intensified. The child was beautiful, with wide, curious eyes and a tuft of dark hair, but Janet looked at her with a baffling detachment. She refused to dress her in anything but a dreary palette of gray, beige, and slate. There were no pink ribbons, no frilly dresses, just utilitarian onesies that made the poor baby look like she was living in a black and white film. She rarely used her name, referring to her only as the baby or her. At family gatherings, Janet's complaints were a constant, droning soundtrack to every holiday and birthday. Kaylee, a toddler who was barely 2 years old, was already being branded as too emotional, too needy, too dramatic. Janet would roll her eyes when Kaylee cried for her, sighing with theatrical exasperation. "See what I mean?" she'd say to anyone who would listen. "Girls are just born with all this drama." It was agonizing to watch, especially for Ryan and me. Our home was filled with the ghosts of the children we couldn't have. Every empty room was a testament to our failure. We had poured our life savings into fertility treatments, endured every humiliation and heartbreak the process had to offer, and here was my sister, blessed with a healthy child she so clearly resented. One Sunday afternoon, after a particularly difficult family dinner where Janet had openly told our grandmother she just didn't bond with Kaylee, I cornered her in the kitchen. My voice was trembling, a mixture of desperation and audacity. "Janet," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. If you're so unhappy, Ryan and we would love her. We would give anything to have a child. We would raise Kaylee as our own. Janet's head snapped toward me. The look in her eyes was wild, almost feral. A strange, twisted smile spread across her lips. Give her to you? She scoffed, her voice dripping with a venom that shocked me. I would rather sell her to strangers on the internet than let you and Ryan play house with my daughter. I recoiled as if struck, her words echoing in the sterile silence of a kitchen. At the time, I dismissed it as hyperbole, a cruel, exaggerated jab meant to wound me. I never imagined she could have meant it. A year later, Janet announced her second pregnancy, and her obsession with having a son reached a terrifying new crescendo. If it's another girl, I'm terminating, she declared over a family Zoom call, her tone leaving no room for debate. I am not having another failure. She plunged headfirst into a world of pseudoscience and old wives' tales, religiously consulting Chinese gender calendars, drinking foul-smelling herbal oils, and even scheduling a consultation for an absurdly expensive gender selection IVF procedure in a country halfway across the world. We all watched, horrified and bewildered, treating her fixation as a dark, uncomfortable form of entertainment. Then, the impossible happened. An early blood test confirmed it. She was having a boy. The news transformed her. She was euphoric, incandescent with joy. The gender reveal party for Liam was the polar opposite of Kaylee's. This time, when the blue smoke filled the air, Janet fell to her knees, her body racked with genuine, heartfelt sobs of pure relief. It was a deeply unsettling spectacle. In that moment of overwhelming joy, little Kaylee, who was now nearly 3, toddled over to her mother, her face a mask of concern. She reached out a tiny hand to touch Janet's arm, wanting to comfort her, to understand her tears. Janet, without even looking, shoved her aside. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a forceful, dismissive push that sent Kaylee stumbling backward. She tripped and fell hard against the leg of a metal swing set, her small cry of pain completely lost in the cacophony of celebration. I saw a long, angry scrape bloom on her knee, welling up with blood. No one else seemed to notice. They were all crowding around Janet, congratulating her on her victory. I rushed over to Kaylee, scooping her into my arms and carrying her inside, my heart a cold, hard knot of rage in my chest. For the remainder of her pregnancy with Liam, we kept our distance. The dynamic had become too toxic, too painful to witness. She made a grand show of traveling to Europe for the final trimester, claiming it was for a birthing retreat, but we all knew it was a flimsy excuse to find a cheaper hospital. About 2 months after Liam was born, our mother organized a family FaceTime call. It was the first time most of us would see the new baby. 7 little boxes appeared on my laptop screen, a Brady Bunch grid of our fractured family. The call started sweetly enough. Janet, looking tired but triumphant, cradled a sleeping Liam, who was swaddled in a onesie that read, "Mommy's #1 man." Then my aunt, ever the pragmatist, asked the question that was hanging in the air. "He's beautiful, Janet. But where's Kaylee? We want to see the big sister." Janet's smile froze. Her eyes darted downward, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly small and evasive. She's not here with me." My aunt, bless her persistent heart, didn't let it go. "What do you mean she's not with you? Where is she? With Mark?" And then, the confession. It tumbled out of Janet in a rushed, defensive whisper. She had given Kaylee up for adoption. She'd signed the papers in mid-December, when she was 6 months pregnant with Liam. Her justification was as chilling as the act itself. "I knew I couldn't handle 2 kids, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And besides, giving her away before Christmas saved a fortune on presents. That money paid for my trip to Europe." A stunned, horrified silence fell over the call. In the little box on my screen, I saw my grandmother's hand fly to her chest. Her face went pale, her breathing becoming ragged and shallow. She started gasping, her lips forming Kaylee's name over and over. Chaos erupted. I was screaming at Janet, my voice cracking with disbelief and fury. "We would have taken her, Ryan, and I begged you for her." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ryan's face. He wasn't angry. He was deeply, profoundly uncomfortable, his expression shuttered and pale. The call descended into a vortex of shouting and crying until Janet, overwhelmed, simply disconnected her line, leaving the rest of us to deal with the fallout. My grandmother had suffered a severe panic attack and had to be rushed to the emergency room. That night, after hours spent in a sterile hospital waiting room, I came home to a house that felt colder and emptier than ever. The silence was suffocating. I found Ryan in our bedroom, hunched over his phone, his thumbs swiping furiously. He was deleting photos. I peered over his shoulder and saw they were all from 4 years ago, around the time of my last, devastating miscarriage. The images were a random, meaningless jumble, a picture of his lunch, a selfie at his desk, a blurry photo of a document. But then I saw a few that made my blood run cold. They were grainy, black and white images that looked unnervingly like ultrasound photos. The timeline gnawed at me. 4 years ago, the miscarriage that had left me hospitalized and broken. It could have been a coincidence. He could have been deleting old, painful memories of our loss. But a dark, insidious seed of suspicion had been planted. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight. He flinched, startled by my presence. He quickly locked his phone and stood up, avoiding my eyes. "Just clearing out old junk," he mumbled, before brushing past me and disappearing into the master bathroom, locking the door behind him. I could hear the faint, rhythmic tapping of his thumb on the screen. He was still deleting. When he finally emerged, his face was a stony mask. I decided to press him, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Why were you deleting pictures from 4 years ago, Ryan?" He snapped, his voice sharp and defensive. "God, can you just let it go? You're being paranoid. What happened with Janet and Kaylee is her business. We need to stay out of it." His reaction was bizarrely out of proportion. I hadn't even mentioned Kaylee. The next morning, my mind was a maelstrom of fear and suspicion. I made a phone call that felt like the ultimate betrayal, the point of no return. I hired a private investigator. I gave him a simple, devastating mandate: find out where Kaylee is, confirm her paternity, and give me everything he could find to build a case against my sister. The investigator, a stoic ex-cop named Miller, was ruthlessly efficient. 2 weeks later, he summoned me to his drab office. He slid a thick manila envelope across his desk. Inside was the complete anatomy of my husband's betrayal. Hotel receipts from a town 50 miles away, dated for the exact week I was in the hospital after my miscarriage. Credit card statements showing charges for flowers and dinners for two. And the most damning evidence of all, a series of recovered text messages between Ryan and Janet. Messages filled with coded language, whispered secrets, and frantic plans. The timeline was irrefutable. 4 years ago, while I lay in a hospital bed, mourning the loss of our baby, my sister had been comforting my husband. Kaylee had been born exactly 9 months later. Miller had even managed to get a DNA sample. He'd contacted our grandmother and, under a clever pretext, had her retrieve an old toothbrush Kaylee had left at her house. The lab report was the final page in the envelope. It was a match. Ryan was her father. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of Miller's office, the world outside blurring into an indistinct smear of color and light. A wave of nausea washed over me, so powerful I had to grip the steering wheel to keep from vomiting. The pain was physical, a white-hot agony that seared through my chest. But beneath the pain, a cold, hard resolve began to form. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I drove home in a state of chillingly calm clarity. I had been a victim for too long. Now, I would be the architect of their downfall. A week later, the stage was set. I sat in my car in the apartment complex parking lot, the manila envelope resting on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. I had arranged it perfectly. I told Janet I wanted to talk to clear the air. I told Ryan I had a surprise for him when he got home. I watched as they pulled into the lot within minutes of each other, Ryan's silver Honda parking just 2 spots away from Janet's red SUV. They emerged from their cars, exchanging a quick, almost imperceptible glance of recognition before walking towards the building, maintaining a careful, rehearsed distance between them. My hands trembled as I gripped the envelope. I gave them 5 minutes, letting them settle into the comfort of their shared deception before I followed. The elevator ride to our floor felt like an eternity. I could hear their voices through the apartment door, light and casual, the sound of it making my stomach churn with revulsion. My key slid into the lock and turned with a soft click. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting from ease to mild surprise. Ryan was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Janet was leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping a glass of water. The sheer normalcy of the scene was grotesque. Hey, babe, Ryan said, his eyes still glued to his screen. Janet just stopped by. I walked over to the coffee table and placed the envelope down with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady and cold. All three of us. Janet rolled her eyes, her classic move of dismissive arrogance. Look, if this is about Kaylee again, I told you it's done. The adoption is final. There's nothing to talk about. I said nothing. I simply opened the envelope and began to lay its contents across the surface of the coffee table, one by one. The hotel receipts, the phone records, and finally, the DNA test results, which I placed directly in front of Ryan. His face drained of all color. He stared at the papers, a dawning horror in his eyes. What is this?" he stammered, his voice a pathetic crackle. "You know exactly what it is," I replied, my voice unwavering. "It's proof. Proof that 4 years ago, while I was in the hospital losing our baby, you were sleeping with my sister." Janet let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh my God," she sneered. "You actually hired someone to dig all this up? That is the most pathetic thing I have ever heard." I turned my gaze to her, my eyes locking onto hers. "Is it pathetic that your daughter, the one you threw away, is also his daughter?" I held up the DNA report. "Is it pathetic that you gave away his child without ever telling him the truth?" Ryan shot to his feet, his phone clattering to the floor. "This is fake," he yelled, his voice escalating into a panic shout. "You're making this all up. You're just jealous because Janet could have kids and you couldn't." I calmly pulled out my own phone and pressed play on the audio file Miller had retrieved. It was a recording from Janet's own baby monitor, a conversation she'd had with Ryan over the phone just after Liam was born. Their voices filled the room, clear and damning. Ryan talking about the importance of keeping their secret. Janet laughing about how I could never find out who Kaylee's real father was. The color drained from Janet's face. Her sneer vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fury. She slammed her water glass down on the counter with enough force to crack it. "You recorded us?" "Your security system did," I replied coolly. "The one you installed to protect your precious son." I gathered the papers back into a neat stack. "I've already filed for divorce, Ryan. Our joint accounts are frozen. Your papers will be served tomorrow." He lunged for the documents, a desperate, clumsy attempt to erase the evidence, but I was faster. "You can't do this," he roared. "Half that money is mine." "Actually, I can," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. Courts tend to look unfavorably on infidelity and financial deception during asset division. I turned my attention back to Janet. "Tell me, did Ryan ever offer you money for Kaylee? Any child support for his secret daughter?" Janet's face twisted into a mask of rage. "He said he couldn't risk it without you finding out," she shrieked. "He promised he would help me once you two finally divorced, but then you just kept trying and trying to have another baby." And just like that, their fragile alliance shattered. They turned on each other with the ferocity of cornered animals. Ryan accused her of trapping him, of using a baby to ruin his life. Janet screamed at him for being a coward, for letting her raise his child alone for 4 years while he played the part of the grieving husband. I stepped back, watching the beautiful, satisfying implosion of their conspiracy. As they shrieked at each other, their faces contorted with hatred, the apartment door burst open. My grandmother stood there, flanked by my aunt and uncle. She was still frail from her hospital stay, but her eyes were blazing with a righteous fury that seemed to fill the room. "Enough!" Her voice, though weak, cut through their squabbling like a razor. "Janet, we're going to talk about this adoption. Now." Janet crossed her arms, a pathetic attempt at defiance. "It's done," she spat. "It was a closed adoption. No contact. I made sure of it." My aunt, a family law attorney, stepped forward. "The Sunshine Private Adoption Agency, wasn't it? I recognize the name from the paperwork you left at Mom's house. I've dealt with them before in court." Janet's smug expression began to crumble. "So what?" "So," my aunt continued, her tone sharp and clinical, "they have a rather notorious 6-month reversal window. An adoption can be contested if it can be proven that both biological parents did not give legal consent." She turned her piercing gaze on Ryan. "Did you sign any paperwork, Ryan? Did you consent to your daughter being adopted?" Ryan shook his head, looking dazed. I didn't even know she was mine until after she was born. Janet told me it was from a one-night stand." "I chose a family in Oregon." Janet shrieked at me, her composure completely gone. "I picked them specifically, so you could never find her. They love her. They're probably more attached to her than you could ever be. I reached into my purse and pulled out another document. Actually, they've been trying to get in touch with you. It seems you failed to disclose Kaylee's significant behavioral issues. The ones you were always complaining about. Janet lunged for her phone. I'll call them right now. I'll tell them to keep her. They're already on their way back, I said quietly. They contacted the agency 2 weeks ago to initiate a return. My lawyer has been handling the communication. My grandmother moved to stand directly in front of Janet. You have two choices, she said, her voice as cold and hard as steel. You can cooperate in getting your daughter back into this family, or I will write you out of my will. You and your son. Janet's face turned a blotchy red. You can't threaten me with money. I just did, my grandmother replied. That little girl deserves a family, not to be discarded because you have a psychotic preference for boys. Desperate, Janet turned back to Ryan, grabbing his arm. We can fight this, Ryan. Together. We can get custody of our daughter. Ryan ripped his arm away from her as if he'd been burned. Our daughter? You gave our daughter away, without even telling me she was mine. You let me live a lie for 4 years. You didn't want her either. Janet screamed back. You were relieved when I told you I was handling it. My aunt raised her phone. I'm recording this, by the way, she announced calmly. Your admission that you orchestrated this adoption specifically to spite your sister is going to be fascinating to present in family court. Janet made a desperate dash for the door, but my uncle moved to block her path, his large frame an impassable wall. My truck is blocking your car in, Janet, he said, his voice a low rumble. You're not going anywhere. Just then, Janet's phone, which she'd left on the counter, began to ring. The screen lit up with the name of the adoption agency. She snatched it up and answered on speaker, trying to regain some semblance of control. Miss Janet, a professional voice said, I'm calling to inform you that the adoptive family has had a personal emergency and their travel plans have been expedited. They will be arriving in town this evening. We need to know where they should bring Kaylee. My house, Janet said quickly. They can bring her to my house. A new voice suddenly cut in, smooth and authoritative. It was my lawyer, Nathaniel, who had been conferenced into the call. Actually, we have already arranged for Kaylee to be taken to her great-grandmother's residence. All parties have agreed it is the safest and most neutral location for the transfer. Janet let out a primal scream of rage and hurled her phone against the wall, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. Ryan instinctively backed away from her as she spun around, her eyes wild with fury, her rage now directed at everyone in the room. You planned this, she shrieked, her finger pointing accusingly at me. All of you. You think you can do this? You will never be her mother. Never. I agreed, my voice quiet but firm. But neither will you. You gave up that right when you used her as a weapon to hurt me. My aunt produced a folder from her briefcase. Ryan, she said, her tone all business, these are documents relinquishing your parental rights. If you sign them now, you can likely avoid prosecution for child abandonment and retroactive child support payments. Ryan's hands shook as he took the papers. Prosecution? You knew you had a child for 4 years and provided zero financial support, my aunt explained. Janet's own text messages prove your knowledge of paternity. He didn't even read the documents. He just snatched the pen from her and signed, desperate to extricate himself from the disaster he had helped create. Janet watched, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, as her last possible ally abandoned her. This isn't over, she hissed at me, her voice low and menacing. I will get her back. She is mine. Legally, for now, yes, my aunt conceded. But the family court will be very interested in your extensive social media history. All those boy mom posts, your complaints about wanting to rehome your daughter, your statement just minutes ago that you would rather sell her than allow family to adopt her. It paints a very compelling picture. We left the apartment like a funeral procession, a convoy of separate cars heading toward my grandmother's house. Janet tried to follow, but she drove so erratically that a police officer pulled her over before she'd gone 5 blocks. By the time she finally arrived, the adoptive family's minivan was already parked in the driveway. I stood on the porch, my heart pounding, as they opened the side door. And there she was. Kaylee. She looked smaller than I remembered, her tiny frame swallowed by a puffy pink coat I'd never seen before. Her hair is longer, pulled back into 2 neat pigtails. She was clutching a worn, stuffed elephant to her chest. The adoptive mother looked utterly exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She's been asking for someone she calls Andy for weeks, she whispered to me, her voice strained. She cries for her every single night. My heart fractured. Kaylee's eyes scanned the crowd of unfamiliar faces, her expression a mixture of confusion and fear. Just then, Janet pushed her way through the group, her face a desperate, smiling mask. Kaylee recoiled instantly, hiding behind the adoptive father's legs. "I don't know you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Janet dropped to her knees. "I'm your mommy, baby," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Remember me? I'm your mommy." But Kaylee just shook her head, pressing herself closer to the strangers who had been her whole world for the past few months. Then her eyes found me. A flicker of recognition, a spark of hope, lit up her small face. "Auntie," she cried out, her voice clear and bright. She broke away from the adoptive parents and ran to me, her small arms wrapping tightly around my legs. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug that I never wanted to end. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe now." Janet's scream of pure, animalistic rage tore through the quiet afternoon, sending Kaylee into a fresh wave of terrified tears. The scene dissolved into chaos. My grandmother ushered us inside, lawyers were called, and emergency custody papers were drafted on the dining room table. The battle for Kaylee was only just beginning, but as I held her trembling little body in my arms, for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. The future was a terrifying unknown, a landscape of legal battles and emotional minefields, but in that moment, none of it mattered. I had her back, and I would burn the world to the ground before I ever let her go again.